Welcome in here to the Friday Shoot Around. I am Ryan Gilbert. Today, we are joined by former Wildcat Pierson McAtee. For those of you that are familiar with the Friday walkthrough with Cole Carmody and Monty Spiller from the football season, this is going to be basically the same exact thing, except we're going to be talking K-State basketball. We will not have Pierson on here every week. We're going to sort of rotate guests as we go through the season. But today, we got Pierson McAtee on. Pierson, how you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, appreciate you having me on. Excited to get this going and talk about the exciting season we've seen so far.
We're sponsored by the Part-Time Beverage Company. The first half is sponsored by the Cape Cod. Second half is sponsored by the Club Soda. Be sure to get those wherever you can at your local liquor store. Pierson, let's go ahead and jump right into this. You obviously played for Bruce Weber. To see a coach go like that, and for not just Jerome Tang, but for any head coach to come in, were you maybe, a little hesitant with a new coach? I know you've built a relationship with him. You've connected with him. How have those interactions been with Coach Tang and his whole staff?
Yeah. First of all, any interaction I've had with Coach Tang and his staff has been nothing but great. Without a doubt, it's very exciting. I think the fans can easily tell this is, and the staff is fun to be around to see. They're very active on social media. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't hard for me at first, with my loyalty and my experiences with Coach Weber. I mean, nothing but great things to say about that man and his staff and how I was treated and, the experiences that we were able to have. But any sort of bittersweet feeling I had at first, it went away as soon as I met Coach Tang and his staff. I understood, where they stood, their values. I have a great appreciation for him being in the league this long. The success he had down at Baylor and kind of how he leads his program with faith-based as well was really cool to see, and I could tell right from the get-go. So it's been great to start to meet that staff. Looking forward to continue to get to know him over the next few years.
I think the non-conference slate for K-State, by and large, was rather forgetful. There was obviously some highlights, some big wins in there. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. But after the non-conference slate was done and before Big 12 play started, I don't think any of us expected K-State to be 4-0 right now with all these wins they've gotten. They've been just, so impressive. But heading into Big 12 play, how did you think this team was prepared to play in the toughest conference in the nation?
Yeah, great question. Goes without saying that you could tell from the get-go looking at the first 10 games or anyone's schedule within the Big 12, it's going to be a gauntlet. I mean, so many ranked teams. I mean, they're projecting at some point all 10 teams getting into the tournament. I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit worried going into those first 10 games just with, a newer team. I knew we had a great, obviously, win in the Thanksgiving tournament down in the Caymans, LSU squad that obviously went on to have a big win already. When you look at the Big 12, if you're right around that 500 mark and you've taken care of business in non-conference, you're going to be a lock to get into the tournament. And looking at our first 10 games, you got KU twice, Texas twice, Florida in the SEC Challenge. Those two tough road games to start with Texas and Baylor. Quite honestly, I would have been pretty happy with 500 through these first 10 games and to be able to start, 4-0, two huge road wins. That just says nothing but how prepared those guys were going into the season.
Why has Kansas State been able to win these first four games in the Big 12? I know they've kind of changed the pace. Last time we saw them against Oklahoma State versus what we saw on the road against Baylor in Texas. Those games were up in the 90s and the hundreds. Mm-hmm. And I think that really kind of tells you how this staff is going to, the game plan is going to be different every single game based off of the opponent. So, they've changed the pace. They've played good offense at times. They've played solid defense at times. We'll talk about Marquise Snow and Keontae Johnson later on. But why is Kansas State 4-0 right now?
It's pretty simple. Why any teams win, especially when it gets to conference play, it's just toughness, mental toughness, physical toughness. The physical and mental toughness only gets harder as you go along. When you've got 2 games a week, especially if it's back-to-back road games, especially once you start going out to West Virginia, it's late nights getting back home. That's where you really start to learn a lot about your team. And I think, having a longer Texas road trip to start it by just staying down there to play then at Waco and not letting kind of the hype and the buzz and the high of, scoring 116 points in a game get to you and taking care of business at Baylor. just showed a lot about how mature this team seems to be. But toughness is the only way to win these types of games in conference.
You mentioned the maturity of this team. How can it be? How can a team be so mature and so just experienced with 11 newcomers? I mean, is that just all coaching?
I wouldn't say it's all coaching. I think it's a big part of it. I think trusting in what looks to be a player-led team is always huge. I know that's something that Coach Weber always harped on. Is it's got to start from the players, your leaders. It's why we had a lot of success, kind of in my later years with Barry and Cam and Dean all stepping up and becoming leaders from those underclassmen. So when you have guys, experience like Keontae, I know he was out for a couple of years, but just his toughness and ability to fight through. Marquise has led the team very well. And just having a couple of those transfers that can help lead the Cam Carters and those guys that may not have had as many minutes at this level yet. You can tell that they feed off that energy and that maturity.
What qualities do you think this team? I know we're only 4 games into the Big 12, but what qualities does this team right now, based off of what you're seeing, what qualities do they share with Barry Brown, Dean Wade, and Kamau Stokes, those teams that won the Big 12 and won in the NCAA tournament and got to the Elite Eight? How do these two teams, I guess, those seasons kind of compare to each other?
Yeah, I think being resilient, responding after getting punched in the mouth at any point in the game. I mean, if anything of the high scoring games of, I mean, even West Virginia, but specifically Texas and Baylor. I mean, the Texas game, they really never went through a drought. I was texting a couple guys about the game, and I'm like, we got to get a couple stops down the stretch. We've already hit 100 points here with 5 minutes to go. And he texted me back with about 2 minutes left, said, "Oh, we finally got some stops." I was like, not really. We just kept scoring with them. And that's what it took that game. And obviously a really good defensive team like Oklahoma State, it was going to take, getting those extra scores in a low scoring game. And so I'm interested to see as we go along, can we get stops in a high scoring game, when it's coming down to those last 2 to 3 minutes. And that'll tell really how far we can go in conference and then beyond in the tournament, hopefully.
Sure. And I don't think anyone's expecting K-State to go 18-0. Would be awesome if that happens. But, I'm excited to finally, if it ever happens, to see K-State lose a game, just to see how they respond and how, this team can be resilient. But you mentioned just, teams are going to go on runs. And it seemed like over these last 4 games, maybe a few times games were slipping away from Kansas State, right? They had the lead for most of that Baylor game, and then it slips out and it goes to overtime. An inexperienced group, an immature group would probably fold and lose a game where they blow a lead. But, Ishmael Massoud, I mean, we got to talk about him just stepping up. And you mentioned Cam Carter from top to bottom. Obviously, Johnson and Noel, steal the spotlight, so to speak. But K-State's depth has been very impressive this season, playing basically 8 guys to start Big 12 play. Once David Gasson's back, that'll go back up to 9 guys. Hopefully, maybe Dorian Finisher can get on the court a little bit. But the depth has really been impressive, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's gonna take consistency from your leaders, right? Marquise and Keontae. But even when they have a game like Keontae, I know he didn't have the game he necessarily wanted to against Oklahoma State, to still fight, get rebounds. It's going to take that one special X factor every game, if not a couple in the high scoring ones, right? Ish hitting the big shots at Baylor. I thought Cam Carter, I think was at the Texas game, he had a crazy stat line with everything that, he was a part of, with rebounds, assists, steals. It's going to take those X factor guys, especially when David comes back too, especially from the big man position. Just helping out Bebe and Tomlin down there. That's going to be huge as it gets further into the season and you face, some true big men down there that can beat you up as the season gets going along.
We'll end the first half with this. What do you think, or I guess which player is more important to this team? Is it Marquise Noel or Keontae Johnson? You can make an argument for either one of those players, with obviously, Noel's leadership that he had in the offseason and what he does on the court. But Keontae Johnson has also the ability to just take over a game.
Yeah, it's tough. And no, it's not the answer you want to hear, but you got to have both. I mean, to reach this level, being 4-0 in the Big 12 and only having one loss through non-conference, I mean, they both provide so much. And to keep this whole team, especially with the lack of experience together, I know Keontae is always going to be important. He's always going to be that kind of concrete, but Marquise controlling the pace, getting the guys under control on whatever side of the floor it is, making sure the guys who are needing valuable minutes at the end of the game are staying out of foul trouble. Point guard is always going to have just that little bit more of importance on the game. It's just like quarterback in football. So I would just give the nod, I guess, a little bit to Marquise from that standpoint, but they're both so necessary on this team.
We talked about the depth. I mean, both those two guys are so important, obviously, but you go down the entire roster, right? Noel and Johnson are going to have some off nights, and that's why K-State haven't lost a game in the Big 12 and only one game all season. It's because, we saw it against Oklahoma State. Both those guys, I think, were 3 of 13 from the field in the first half, and it was Ish Massoud who stepped in and drilled a three. Cam Carter had the buzzer beater. Desi Sills was great off the bench. So it's a full roster from top to bottom, and everybody's making contributions on this team. We'll go ahead and take a break here on the first half. We'll be right back. And once again, we're sponsored by the Part-Time Beverage Company, and this is Friday Shoot Around. Welcome back in here to the Friday Shoot Around. I am Ryan Gilbert, joined by former Wildcat, Big 12 champion, Pierson McAtee. Once again, we're sponsored by the Part-Time Beverage Company. And Pierson, I want to talk about trap games. You're a former player. I don't know if you really buy into that or subscribe to those, but the writing on the wall is there for Kansas State when they come in ranked number 11 and they hadn't been ranked all year, right? This team, I feared maybe a little bit they wouldn't handle business and they would let that ranking get to them. That was not the case. And maybe it was in the first half. K-State came out slow, but a win is a win, and I don't think it was much of an issue. But K-State was able to get over the hump against Oklahoma State, right? We talked about that game earlier. Against Kansas, that game's coming up next week on Tuesday. You got a game before that against TCU. Are you fearful that this team maybe looks ahead to that game in the Octagon of Doom?
I wouldn't say so, and a couple reasons. Obviously, when you have a gauntlet like the Big 12 is, I think TCU is still ranked, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're going into a ranked opponent's house. I don't see any sort of looking ahead. I think they'll still be prepared, even if they don't handle business against TCU. Just based on the responses I've seen throughout the media from all the players. I mean, Marquise had obviously National Player of the Week material last week, and everything that I saw from him was thankful. And we've got a game against Oklahoma State, and I don't think that's a fake response at all. I think they're focused on the mission. And any time, especially when you're playing a road game in the Big 12, you got to get up and do it. Now, if the roles were reversed and they just played TCU and they're going, to Oklahoma State or Oklahoma State at home heading into the KU game, then maybe I see that just with a little lower ranking within the Big 12. But I think they'll be ready to play on Saturday.
Is your favorite memory playing at K-State, beating KU in 2019?
It's definitely up there. Luckily, I've been able to be a part of a good amount of special games. The first one that came through for me was beating OU, ranked number 1 at home. Buddy Hield, Ryan Spangler. I can't remember what the other guard's name was, but so that kind of kicked it off. And then you go into the Elite Eight run, beating Kentucky, Coach Cal, in a year that we didn't have Dean in the postseason and weren't expected to make it out of our first round matchup. Obviously got a little bit of luck with UMBC against Virginia. I won't deny that. But the Big 12 championship at home, Barry and Dean and Cam's senior year, that one's always going to stick in my head. Now, rivalry, being a Kansas kid, the KU game's always going to stick there. But I'd say, championships are forever. And so that's something that'll always stick with me.
Playing KU's tough, right? That's a top-notch program wherever that game's played, and playing obviously in Allen Fieldhouse is tough just because of that crowd. Do you think it's tough to play in Bramlage in a sense that you can maybe come out emotionally drunk the first couple of minutes with that atmosphere in the Octagon of Doom?
Oh, without a doubt. Especially with me just going to all these rivalry games over the years between K-State and KU. I'd be lying if it didn't mean more and there weren't more, emotions and you can easily get caught up in that. So I'll be interested to see how this team can handle that. I was happy, obviously, with what they did at Baylor after the Texas game, because that's where I thought there could have been a letdown. and they showed completely differently. They kept scoring at a high pace, and they got a grind out overtime win down there. So it'll be a different experience. I'm glad that the Bramlage was packed this week on Tuesday. I wasn't able to make it, but it sounded like it was pretty packed in and had some good noise. So they at least got a larger crowd experience before this KU game, because we all know that thing's going to be packed to the brim.
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, it's going to be packed, and Tang has done so many great things, obviously on the court, on the recruiting trail, but connecting with these fans and getting Bramwoods rocking. I think that's probably one of his strong suits, right? Just going up to the student section and doing the Wabash. It's pretty cool to see. And Bramwoods Coliseum, that place gets bumping, and it makes a true home court advantage for your team. Tang had many reasons why he came to Kansas State, but he mentioned that when he was at Baylor, he remembered those fans and how rowdy it can get. So it's certainly going to be a heck of an atmosphere. And we had a question about this on our Power Cat Questions podcast this week. How long do you think it's going to be until it's sort of normal for Bramlage to be like that night in and night out?
Yeah, that's tough to say. I mean, I don't think anything will ever compare to the KU game. I think that's just the emotions there, the long history. That's always going to be evident. But if anything, like Tuesday showed, I think it continues throughout the rest of the season, at least with 90% plus capacity. I think what games are we sold out through? Is the Texas Tech game sold out? I would assume
I believe
Florida
so, yeah.
and Texas are already sold out. So I just think if we continue to get some top-notch wins, that's only going to keep going. And quite honestly, even if we did go on a couple game skid here, I think that thing's still going to be about 85-90% full. So the real question is, over the next couple of years, right? Do they maintain that level? Do they maintain the buy-in? And I think with how well, like you said, coaches engage with the fans, especially the student section, I think it'll be something that's here to stay for a long time.
You talked about your relationship with the staff. What do you think about just Malagy and Perry and Dowling, all the assistants from top to bottom? I know you've known Kurt Kelly for a long time. How have they just sort of operated from what you've seen?
Yeah, I haven't seen a ton up front, but from what I can tell, and I know about Coach Perry's just pedigree through the MoCan AAU program, and obviously with coach out of Texas, being down there for a year with Chris Beard and having kind of the recruiting presence that I've heard he's had. They've obviously done a great job. Our recruiting class next year is amazing. I know a lot of that is assistants, boots on the ground. So that's really exciting to see from an assistant coach perspective. I know at least how we operated with Coach Weber was they have the scouts on the teams, or at least they lead it. It seems like they've been locked in. We've obviously had great schemes being 4-0 so far. It doesn't just come from the players playing well. There's a lot of preparation in there. And so obviously they're doing a great job with those scouts.
Last thing we'll talk about with KU in this upcoming game, and I usually don't like to talk about the officials, and I'm sure you've probably noticed this, Pierson. The officiating in the last couple of games for K-State's been kind of inconsistent, right? And I'm not trying to go after the officials. That's low-hanging fruit, and that's not usually what I like to do. But I do want to talk about navigating through that officiating when it's happening, because Kansas State probably missed some calls in their favor, and then on the other end of the stick, there was a couple of calls where K-State got a break. I mean, Jerome Tang, he's learning so many things about being a head coach on the fly, really, and officiating. I guess navigating through those officials is another thing too. Playing KU, I know it probably has somewhat of an impact, and I don't know really what my question is, but how do you get through that when you're playing not only KU but just in the Big 12, because teams are just so physical. West Virginia, the first game in the Big 12, and then Oklahoma State's probably the best defense in this league. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think coach has done a great job navigating it so far. I know I read a little bit about what he said before the Baylor game about trying to take the emotion out of it, being there for his guys, putting his guys first, whether it's coaching them or getting on the refs or whatever it may be, making sure he stays within himself. I think Scott Drew got a technical that game, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't hear him getting a technical very often. So I not to say the emotions got to him, but it could be. So we'll see how the staff reacts with the KU game, but I think they're pretty level headed. And then for the players, it's all about what the precedent is set in practice. If they're complaining in practice, which I haven't seen that on the court, it's going to roll over to the games. And so hopefully what it seems like they're dealing with when you get bad calls you got to shake it off and get to the next play. Another one will come your way. So they've dealt with it well so far. I know I've talked with Austin Bucky and Mason Schoen at length about the flop rule and the charge rule and the refs trying to navigate that. I don't know what the solution is. I can't say I do any better, but I know it's been extremely inconsistent all over the place. And that's what's led to a lot of, I think, the controversy this year. It's happened in, pretty much every single game.
Let's switch gears here. Do you think K-State can win the Big 12? And obviously you're 4-0, like mathematically you have a good advantage right now. I mean, you got a head start. I mean, Baylor's 0-4. It's an uphill battle for them, but also just the way K-State's played on the court. Just looking at their game, is this 4-0 start? Do you think this is sustainable for the rest of the conference schedule?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt that they have the caliber of team and the level-headedness to be able to go and win this. But it's not going to be easy. Like you said, there's going to be, it could be a game, it could be a couple games, it could be a few games that they're going to drop. There's going to be adversity. You've already seen it with David Gasson having to be out. There may be more of that down the line. Obviously, we don't want any of that to happen, but it's just a part of sports. If anything sums it up the best, the year we won the Big 12, we were pretty much 0-2.5. And I say 2.5 because we were at home against West Virginia and we were down, I'm pretty sure it was at least 15, if not 20 points at half. And that's the famous, Barry came in the locker room and had a speech and said, don't step back out there if you don't think we can win this thing and go on and win the league. And sure enough, we rattled off 9 in a row, beat every other single team and went from there. So you never know, with the team of Baylor's caliber, they could turn this thing around real quick and be a contender. So just because you start this way, it's not guaranteed, but they definitely have the caliber of athletes and maturity to be able to go and win this whole thing.
Let's wrap things up here with Kansas State's ceiling this season and heading into the Big 12 play. I thought maybe get an 8-9 seed and maybe win a game and get knocked out by a 1 seed was kind of the best this team could do in March Madness. And that's completely changed. Obviously, you look at bracketology, K-State's about a 4 seed now, according to Joe Lunardi. So I don't know really what the ceiling is. I think K-State's post play, I'm not saying Bebe or Ish, any of these guys are bad, but defensively, I think it can create some problems. You look at TCU on Saturday and Eddie Lampkin down in the post. I mean, that's a guy that could be a problem. I'm not saying it will, but I think this team still has some things to be maybe shaken out, corrected, so to speak, a little bit, and they can still get better and have room to grow. So what do you think the ceiling is for this team, Pierson?
Yeah. I'm not gonna put it past this team at all to do anything. I'm not going to doubt them one bit. I don't want their confidence to be shaken at all. If you ask me kind of what a crystal ball approach would be, I mean, I think our ceiling would probably be around a 2 or 3 seed. It is probably most realistic, but I mean, obviously with what they've proven so far, I think they can do about anything. And even sneak in if they run away with this league up into a 1 seed potential. I mean, I'm not going to put that past them. I agree with you though. A lot of the expectations coming into the season were, if we can, compete in the conference top half, or right around the midpoint and sneak into the tournament, that'd be a win. And obviously, Tang and the entire team didn't believe that for a second and have just continued to, put themselves in a really good position. So, but what you said about Lampkin this weekend, that is going to be a big test, especially for this team the rest of the year. I mean, Caleb Boone had an outstanding game this week. That was obviously a weak point for us, at least during this game. And I know the coaches will have our bigs prepared and they're going to continue to work and figure out ways, even in foul trouble, to be able to get the job done. So that'll be something to look forward here the rest of the season, is how we can deal with a big physical inside presence.
Yep. And it's safe to say right now that K-State, unless things just go completely wrong, is going to be in the field of 68. And like you mentioned with that 2018 season, when you guys went to the Elite Eight, anything can happen once you get into the field. So K-State, as long as things stay on track, they're going to have a chance to do something special this season. Pierson, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Like I said earlier, we're sponsored by the Part-Time Beverage Company. Pierson, appreciate you, man.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I always enjoy getting on and looking forward to do it the rest of the season.
We'll be back here next week on Friday with the Friday shoot around. It won't be Pierson. It'll be a different guest. But be sure to tune into that. Other than that, we'll see you next time.